The Homeowners Association president summoned law enforcement to arrest me for illegally camping at my own lake. What she failed to realize was that her entire upscale community had been unlawfully occupying my property for 16 years. 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning, I'm standing in swim trunks clutching my property deed while two officers approach my grandfather's canvas shelter. The aroma of campfire coffee blended with morning mist, stones crunching beneath boots, and Margaret Williams' piercing voice directing them from behind. That's the individual officers, illegal camping disrupting our tranquil neighborhood. Margaret's French-tipped nails clicked against her tablet as if orchestrating justice itself. The deputies appeared uncomfortable, but were obligated to respond to the complaint. There I was, dismantling my campsite while Homeowners Association residents observed from their balconies like spectators at entertainment. However, here's what Margaret remained unaware of. I had just spent 4 days researching at the county records office. What I uncovered in those archive vaults was about to completely overturn their pristine waterfront development. What actions would you take if your homeowners association secretly utilized your land without authorization? Share your thoughts in the comments and mention your location. I want to discover how many have encountered power-hungry board officials. Allow me to step back and explain how this entire situation began. My name is David, and I inherited 49 acres of untouched lake property from my grandfather, a Korean War veteran who purchased this land in 1954 using his military benefits. We're discussing crystal-clear spring-fed water, 1 3/4 miles of coastline, and some of the finest bass fishing in the region. During my childhood, our family maintained this sacred ritual. Each summer, we'd spend a week camping at Grandpa's lake. He instructed me in fishing from his hand-constructed stone dock, pointed out which trees contained the original 1920s boundary markers, and shared stories around that ancient fire pit he'd built stone by stone. Following my separation last year, and losing my engineering position 4 months later, these camping excursions became my salvation. The scent of burning wood, the sound of loons calling across water at sunrise, the sensation of morning moisture on bare feet. This location preserved my sanity when everything else crumbled. The property borders Pine Lake Estates, an exclusive homeowners association development constructed in 2009. $500,000 residences with impeccably maintained lawns and property, owners who actually measure their grass height with rulers. I'd consistently maintained positive relationships with the neighbors. We'd acknowledge each other, perhaps discuss the weather. Then Margaret Williams secured election as Homeowners Association president. She's 54, operates a white luxury crossover, and works in real estate. Her specialty, fining residents for unauthorized holiday decorations and photographing violations with her tablet, while wearing expensive athletic wear. This woman once issued a formal warning because someone's mailbox was 4 degrees off vertical alignment. I should have anticipated trouble when she began walking the property boundary with that measuring tape. Friday evening, I'd arrived for my customary 4-day camping expedition. I established Grandpa's canvas wall tent in the identical location we'd utilized for decades, directly beside his stone fire pit, approximately 60 yards from the water. I'd completed this routine countless times without a single complaint. But Saturday morning at precisely 6 o'clock, Margaret appeared with 2 sheriff's deputies accompanying her. "This constitutes a residential zone with camping restrictions," she proclaimed as if reciting from some official document. "You must remove this structure immediately." I presented my property deed, clear documentation. David Martinez, inheritor of the estate of Thomas Martinez, 49 acres including all water rights and access privileges. The deputies were visibly uncomfortable. Deputy Johnson actually apologized. "Sir, we must respond to complaints, but this seems to be a civil dispute between neighbors," but Margaret refused to relent. "He's disrupting community peace and damaging our property values. This isn't some recreational vehicle park." So there I was, dismantling my grandfather's tent, while a dozen homeowners association residents stood on their rear decks with their morning coffee, observing the spectacle. The embarrassment burned more intensely than the bacon grease I'd accidentally spilled on my hand earlier. As I loaded my truck, Margaret delivered her final blow. Perhaps next time you'll reconsider before creating problems for our community." That's when I decided to discover exactly what our community actually meant. Monday morning, I'm sitting in my carpentry workshop, still furious over the weekend's humiliation. That's when I receive a certified letter from the County Code Enforcement Office. Margaret had submitted an official complaint claiming I was operating an unpermitted campground and disturbing residential tranquility. The letter threatened daily penalties of $450 until violations were resolved. $450 daily for camping on my own property. That afternoon, I drove directly to the county courthouse, one of those imposing brick structures that smells like floor polish and decades of bureaucratic procedures. The basement, records room felt like a crypt, all concrete walls and flickering fluorescent illumination. But the county clerk, an elderly woman named Florence, brightened when I mentioned my grandfather's name. "Oh dear Thomas Martinez, your grandfather helped survey half this region back then. Precise as clockwork, that man." She retrieved the original 1920 property survey, brittle yellow paper that rustled when we unfolded it. The musty odor of aged documents filled my nostrils as we spread it across the metal table. "Here's something intriguing," Florence said, indicating a faded red line. "Your property boundary extends much farther east than I expected." We overlaid the historical survey with current county maps. What I observed made my hands tremble. The Homeowners Association's private beach, their elaborate gazebo, and their boat launch, all constructed on my land. 2 4/10 acres of premium waterfront property that legally belonged to me. Appears when they subdivided for that development in 2008, somebody made a significant error, Florence whispered. Or perhaps they simply hoped nobody would discover it. Here's a crucial legal principle everyone should understand. Adverse possession laws mean if someone utilizes your land openly for a specific period, usually 7 to 20 years depending on your state, they might actually gain legal ownership. Key takeaway: always monitor your property boundaries, even if you trust your neighbors. I spent the following 4 hours photocopying every document, my heart pounding harder with each page. The original 1920 survey clearly showed my grandfather's property line running directly through what the Homeowners Association now called their exclusive lakefront amenities. They'd been trespassing for 16 years. But here's the revelation that changed everything. Florence mentioned that adverse possession only works if the land use is open and notorious, but also if the true owner doesn't object. Since my family had been regularly using the property for camping, and I had photographs and receipts spanning decades, their adverse possession claim would be nearly impossible to prove. Plus, Florence added with a knowing smile, your grandfather was intelligent enough to file an updated survey in 1989 that specifically noted the eastern boundary markers, that resets any adverse possession timeline. I departed that courthouse feeling like I'd discovered buried treasure. The taste of vindication was sweeter than my morning coffee. That evening, I contacted a surveyor friend of my grandfather's, William Peterson, who'd recently moved into, you guessed it, Pine Lake Estates. After explaining the situation, William agreed to meet me at the property line the following morning. "David," he said, his voice serious over the phone, "if what you're describing is accurate, this affects far more than just your camping privileges." The crunching sound of gravel under my truck tires as I drove home that night had a different rhythm. It sounded like justice advancing. 2 days later, another certified letter arrived, this time from Williams & Associates Legal Services. Margaret had hired her own Homeowners Association attorney to send me a cease and desist letter that was essentially legal intimidation wrapped in expensive letterhead. The letter demanded I stop harassing residents with frivolous property claims, and threatened to sue me for intentional interference with quiet enjoyment of property. The smell of costly paper and legal terminology made my stomach churn, but the real surprise, Margaret had called an emergency homeowners association meeting for that Thursday evening. Topic: addressing problematic neighbors. I wasn't invited, but I attended anyway. The community clubhouse was overcrowded, 49 residents crammed into a space meant for 32. The air thick with burned coffee and stale pastries. Margaret stood at the front with a PowerPoint presentation titled, "Protecting Our Investment," complete with photographs of my messy campsite and what she termed my inappropriate camping activities. "This individual," she said, clicking to a photo of my tent, "is attempting to exploit a technicality to steal our community amenities that we've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain." The nervous murmuring from the crowd told me not everyone was accepting her narrative. "He wants to charge us rent for our own beach," Margaret continued. "I propose a special assessment of $7,500 per household to fund our legal defense against this property grabber." That's when I stood up. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "I'm not trying to grab anyone's property. You're occupying mine." The thick packet of courthouse documents hit the table with a satisfying thud. I'd made copies for everyone. This is the original 1920 survey of my grandfather's property, overlaid with your current development map, your private beach, your gazebo, your boat launch. They're all built on land that legally belongs to me. I watched 49 faces transition from annoyed to confused to genuinely concerned as they studied the documents. The rustle of paper, being passed hand to hand, sounded like leaves in a windstorm. Then William Peterson stood up from the third row. "I need to examine those documents," he said quietly. William's a retired surveyor. When he discusses property lines, people listen. He studied my paperwork for what felt like an eternity, while the room held its breath. "These documents appear to be legitimate," William finally announced. "If accurate, this represents a significant boundary discrepancy that should have been identified during the original development survey. Here's another crucial knowledge principle. Title insurance claims. If your property boundaries are disputed, your title insurance should cover legal defense costs up to your policy limits." Key takeaway: always purchase owner's title insurance when buying property. It protects against hidden boundary disputes like this. The unexpected development came when William offered something surprising. I'd be willing to verify these boundaries, using modern GPS equipment at no charge. This affects all of us, and we deserve to know the truth. You could hear a pin drop. Margaret's face had transformed from righteous indignation to panic-stricken pale. "This is all fabricated nonsense," she sputtered. "William, you can't seriously be considering—" "I'm considering the facts," William interrupted. "And these facts suggest we may have a serious problem." As the meeting dissolved into heated side conversations, 3 residents quietly approached me. Sandra Rodriguez whispered, "I've had my own boundary disputes with Margaret. She's not exactly trustworthy." Robert Chen added, "We never received proper surveys when we purchased our lots." The 3rd resident, an elderly man named Frank Thompson, shook my hand firmly. "Your grandfather was a good man. I knew him from the Veterans of Foreign Wars. If he said those markers were accurate, they were accurate." Walking to my truck that night, I realized the community was splitting right down the middle. Team Margaret versus Team Truth. And for the first time since this whole situation started, I wasn't fighting alone. The sound of car doors slamming echoed across the parking lot as neighbors chose sides and drove home in tense silence. Margaret's response to losing control of that meeting was swift and vicious. Within a week, she'd convinced the city council to investigate me for zoning violations, reported me to the Internal Revenue Service for unreported rental income from camping activities, and somehow organized an informal boycott of my custom carpentry business. 3 of my regular clients suddenly canceled orders with weak excuses. Word was spreading that I was mentally unstable, following my separation and harassing innocent homeowners. The whisper campaign was working. But the real devastating blow came when a city inspector showed up during my next camping trip. I'm sitting by the fire pit enjoying my morning coffee when this guy in a clipboard and hard hat combination approaches, like he's about to discover environmental violations. "Sir, you're operating a commercial campground without proper permits. That's a $450 daily fine until violations are corrected." I could smell Margaret's influence all over this. The inspector had clearly been coached on exactly what to look for and what violations to cite. That Saturday morning, William Peterson arrived with something that looked like a science fiction movie prop. Professional GPS, surveying equipment worth more than my truck. He'd brought two other homeowners association residents, Sandra and Robert Rodriguez, who'd apparently grown tired of Margaret's authoritarian leadership style. Time to settle this scientifically, William announced, unpacking gear that beeped and chirped like electronic devices having a conversation with a smoke detector. We spent 5 hours methodically locating every original survey marker. William's GPS unit locked onto satellites with sharp electronic beeps while we tramped through brush following property lines that hadn't been verified in decades. The smell of fresh-cut grass from nearby homeowners association landscaping mixed with the earthy scent of disturbed soil where we dug around old boundary markers. What we found was worse than I'd originally thought. "David," William said, studying his GPS readings, "you don't just own their beach and gazebo. According to these coordinates, you own 2 9/10 acres of what they consider prime homeowners association common area. But here's the revelation that changed everything. Buried in my grandfather's original 1920 deed was something called a perpetual easement for lake access. This legal term meant my family had the permanent right to cross any property necessary to reach our lake, even if that property was later sold or developed. Here's a knowledge principle that could save you thousands: prescriptive easements. Even if you don't own land, you might own the legal right to cross it if you've done so openly and continuously for many years without permission. Key takeaway: research all easements on your property deed. They can provide unexpected legal advantages. In disputes, Sandra Rodriguez had been taking notes throughout our survey expedition. This means Margaret knew about the boundary problems from the beginning, she said quietly. Remember that board meeting in 2020 when she mentioned property line concerns but said they'd been resolved? Robert nodded grimly. She said getting a new survey would be unnecessarily expensive and that we should trust the original developer work. William finished his measurements and provided me a professional surveyor's report that would hold up in any court. The GPS coordinates matched the 1920 markers within 20 inches. Incredible accuracy for century-old surveying work. Your grandfather knew what he was doing, William said with respect. These boundaries are rock solid legally. As we packed up the equipment, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Drop this or you'll regret it." The threatening message came from a burner phone, but I had a pretty good idea who sent it. That evening, Sandra called with inside intelligence from the latest homeowners association board meeting. "Margaret's panicking," she whispered. She admitted to the board that she's known about the boundary issues since 2020, but decided it would be cheaper to fight than relocate amenities. The recorded board meeting minutes she'd secretly photographed would become crucial evidence later. Walking back to my truck that night, the crunch of gravel under my boots sounded different. More confident, more determined. I wasn't just fighting for my camping rights anymore. I was fighting for honest governance and community integrity. The stakes had officially escalated beyond property lines. This was now about justice. 4 days after William's survey, Sandra Rodriguez called me with information that changed everything. Her voice was shaking as she whispered into the phone from her car in a grocery store parking lot. "David, you need to know what happened at last night's emergency board meeting." Margaret didn't just know about the property lines. She's been covering up something much bigger. Sandra had been secretly recording homeowners association meetings since her own dispute with Margaret 7 months earlier. What she'd captured was explosive. Margaret admitted to the board that the homeowners association borrowed $380,000 against the disputed waterfront property to fund the clubhouse renovation. She used your land as collateral for their loan without telling anyone it wasn't actually homeowners association property. My coffee mug hit the kitchen counter harder than intended. $380,000 borrowed against land they didn't own. "There's more," Sandra continued. Robert found the original development documents. Margaret's brother-in-law was the developer who built Pine Lake Estates. The family knew about the boundary discrepancies from day one, but decided to hide the information rather than lose profitable waterfront lots. The pieces clicked together like a jigsaw puzzle from hell. This wasn't just a property dispute. It was organized fraud involving the developer, homeowners association board, and potentially city officials who approved the development. Robert, Chen had photographed the smoking gun. Board meeting minutes from March 2020. Margaret's own words recorded in official homeowners association documents. Property line discrepancy identified during legal consultation. Board recommendation: cheaper to fight than relocate amenities. Motion to suppress survey results and manage situation quietly. Vote 4-1 approved. They'd known for 5 years and voted to cover it up. But here's the revelation that made my hands shake. William's wife, a retired accountant, had volunteered to audit the Homeowners Association's financial records after hearing about the property dispute. What she found was devastating. Margaret's been embezzling from the Homeowners Association for at least 4 years, Sandra explained. Fake invoices, inflated contractor bills, unauthorized personal expenses. We're talking about $81,000 in missing funds. The smell of betrayal was stronger than the diesel fumes from passing trucks outside my workshop. William called me an hour later with even worse news. David, I checked the Homeowners Association's liability insurance policy. It specifically excludes coverage for known property disputes. If you win this case, the Homeowners Association will be personally liable for all costs. The loan, the land value, legal fees, everything. The math was staggering. Individual homeowner assessments could reach $17,000 to $28,000 each if the Homeowners Association lost. 49 families facing potential financial ruin because their president decided to gamble with other people's money. But here's what really gets me. William continued, his voice tight with anger. The original developer, Margaret's brother-in-law, declared bankruptcy 3 years ago. He took his profits and ran, leaving the Homeowners Association holding the bag for his fraudulent land deals. This wasn't David versus Goliath anymore. This was David versus a criminal conspiracy that had been stealing from their own community for years. The power dynamic had completely flipped. I wasn't just some guy fighting for camping rights. I was potentially the whistleblower who could expose systematic fraud and save dozens of families from financial catastrophe. Sandra's final bombshell made everything clear. The board meeting recording also captured Margaret saying she'd rather destroy that troublemaker than admit the Homeowners Association's mistakes. She's planning something big, David. Be careful. Sitting in my workshop that evening, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and wood stain, I realized this fight had evolved far beyond personal grievance. My grandfather hadn't just left me 49 acres of beautiful lake property. He'd left me the evidence to expose corruption and protect an entire community. The question was no longer whether I could win. The question was whether I had the courage to see justice through to the end. The next morning, my kitchen table looked like a war room. William Peterson sat across from me with survey maps spread between coffee cups and legal pads. Sandra and Robert Rodriguez flanked us with their secret recordings and photograph documents. And in the corner, nursing black coffee like it was medicine, sat Rebecca Johnson, a legal aid attorney who'd heard about our case on local radio and offered pro bono representation. "This is bigger than a property dispute," Rebecca said, her voice steady and professional. "We're looking at multiple felonies: embezzlement, conspiracy, fraudulent misrepresentation. I can file criminal referrals alongside the civil case." She laid out our options like a battlefield strategy. Nuclear option: demand immediate removal of all structures on your land. Alternative: negotiate a long-term lease with back rent payments for 16 years of unauthorized use. William pulled out his calculator. 16 years of exclusive waterfront access. Estimated rental value of $2,200 per month. That's $482,400 in back rent plus interest. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the tension in the room as we calculated the financial devastation. But here's another crucial knowledge principle: unjust enrichment doctrine. If someone profits from your property without permission, you can legally demand they return those profits even without a formal rental agreement. Key takeaway: document any unauthorized use of your property. You might be entitled to compensation, even years later. Rebecca organized our evidence into 3 categories: property ownership proof, conspiracy documentation, and financial fraud evidence. "We need one more piece," she said. direct proof that Margaret knew this was illegal from the beginning. That's when Sandra smiled. I've got something better than proof. I've got her admitting it on tape. She played the recording from the secret board meeting. Margaret's voice filled my kitchen. Look, we borrowed against that land because we needed the money. If this Martinez guy wants to make trouble, we'll make his life hell until he gives up. Robert Rodriguez had been quietly organizing a community response. 36 households have signed a petition demanding Margaret's resignation. People are scared about the financial liability, but they're angrier about being lied to. William contributed the technical expertise. I've marked the exact property boundaries with permanent steel posts. Every structure, every improvement, every square foot of encroachment is documented with GPS coordinates. Rebecca outlined our timeline. Week 1, file formal legal notice and settlement offer. Week 2, present evidence to Homeowners Association Board. Week 3, if rejected, file lawsuit and notify media. Week 4, public pressure campaign. Frank Thompson, my grandfather's old fishing buddy, brought something unexpected. Connections. My grandson works at the Herald Tribune. Local paper's been investigating Homeowners Association corruption for months. They'd love this story. The settlement offer Rebecca drafted was surprisingly generous. We're asking for $165,000 for a permanent easement allowing Homeowners Association amenities to remain. That's half the back rent value and far less than relocation costs. But Rebecca added with a slight smile, we're also demanding full public disclosure of the fraud and Margaret's resignation. Non-negotiable. As the afternoon wore on, my kitchen felt less like a war room and more like a community organizing center. The aroma of Sandra's homemade cookies mixed with the sound of staplers binding evidence packets. William finished installing the final boundary markers as sunset painted the lake orange and gold. Your grandfather would be proud, he said, driving steel posts into ground that had been disputed for too long. That evening I sat on my dock with a beer, watching the water reflect the last light of day. Tomorrow we'd deliver our settlement offer. Margaret would have 30 days to accept justice or face the consequences. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore sounded like a countdown timer. Margaret's response to our settlement offer was immediate and explosive. Within hours of Rebecca delivering the legal documents, she'd called another emergency homeowners association meeting and proposed a $7,500 special assessment per household to fund a legal war against me. This greedy opportunist is trying to exploit a technicality to steal our homes, she shouted at the packed clubhouse. The smell of fear and desperation hung in the air like burnt coffee. We cannot let him destroy everything we've built here. But her desperation was showing. 25 households had already signed Sandra's petition demanding Margaret's resignation. The community was fracturing, and she was losing control. The intimidation campaign escalated quickly. Anonymous letters appeared in my mailbox threatening, legal retaliation if you don't drop this scam. My truck tires were slashed while parked outside the courthouse. City inspectors arrived at my property with increasingly ridiculous violation notices. Apparently, my tent stakes were improperly installed camping infrastructure. Then came the fake social media accounts. David Martinez is a divorced deadbeat trying to steal from hardworking families, appeared on every local Facebook group. Don't trust this con artist's lies about property lines. The posts included photos of my camping setup with captions about vagrant camps threatening property values. But here's where Margaret made her biggest mistake. She targeted my business. Fake one-star Google reviews flooded my carpentry company page. Shoddy work, unreliable, tried to overcharge. Anonymous complaints were filed with the Better Business Bureau and State Contractor Licensing Board. 3 more clients suddenly canceled orders after receiving anonymous tips about my legal troubles. The unexpected development came when I installed security cameras around my property. What I captured on video would later become crucial evidence. Margaret herself at 2 a.m. spray painting fraud across my workshop fence. While Margaret raged publicly, I focused on silent preparation. Rebecca Johnson filed for a restraining order based on the escalating harassment. I documented every threatening letter, every act of vandalism, every attempt to destroy my livelihood. William's wife had finished her forensic audit of homeowners association finances. The embezzlement was worse than we'd thought. $81,000 stolen through fake invoices, inflated contractor bills, and unauthorized business expenses that were actually personal purchases. She's been treating the homeowners association treasury like her personal piggy bank, William said, showing me receipts for community events that were actually Margaret's family vacations. Robert Rodriguez had been gathering intelligence from inside the homeowners association board. 3 board members want to accept your settlement offer, he reported, but Margaret's threatening to sue them personally if they betray the community. The board meeting recordings Sandra captured showed Margaret's increasingly unhinged behavior. "I'll destroy David Martinez before I let him humiliate me," she'd said during one closed session. "We have lawyers, we have money, and we have the city council on our side." The crowd's murmur turned to angry buzzing. Margaret's face went white as the magnitude of her exposure became clear. Then I delivered the mic drop moment. "Council members, I never wanted anyone's homes. 4 months ago, I offered a generous settlement, $165,000 for permanent easement rights, allowing all homeowners association amenities to remain exactly where they are. Ms. Williams rejected that offer and chose to wage a campaign of harassment, vandalism, and embezzlement instead. The silence was deafening. All I ever wanted was to camp peacefully at my grandfather's lake, the same lake where he taught me to fish, where he shared stories of serving this country in the Korean War, where my family has gathered for 70 years. Ms. Williams turned that simple wish into a community crisis through her own criminal choices. That's when the district attorney's investigator stood up in the gallery. "Margaret Williams, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and criminal misappropriation of funds." The handcuffs clicked shut as cameras captured every moment. Margaret's supporters watched in stunned silence as their leader was read her rights and led away in front of the entire community. William Peterson rose from his seat. "On behalf of the remaining Homeowners Association board members, we formally accept Mr. Martinez's original settlement offer and apologize to him and this community for the actions of our former president." The crowd erupted in applause that lasted nearly 6 minutes. Mayor Richardson banged his gavel with a smile. Motion carried by acclamation. Case closed. Walking out of those chambers, shaking hands with neighbors who'd become friends through this ordeal, I could hear my grandfather's voice on the evening breeze. "Sometimes doing right ain't easy, but it's always worth it." 7 months later, I'm sitting around my grandfather's stone fire pit, but I'm not alone anymore. William Peterson is teaching his grandson how to tie fishing knots while Sandra Rodriguez flips burgers on the new community grill. The smell of wood smoke and barbecue sauce mixes with the sound of children's laughter echoing across the lake. Margaret pleaded guilty to all charges and received 20 months probation plus full restitution. The new Homeowners Association Board, led by Sandra as president, implemented transparent financial reporting and term limits. Property values not only recovered but increased as the community gained a reputation for honest governance. The $165,000 settlement transformed both my life and the community. I expanded my carpentry business and created the Thomas Martinez Memorial, scholarship for veterans' children pursuing trade skills. Grandpa would have loved knowing his legacy was helping young people learn to work with their hands. The lake property became something even more special than family land. It became community land. We established an annual Lake Day festival that draws families from 3 counties. Kids learn to fish from William at the rebuilt dock. Veterans share stories around the evening campfire. Local artisans sell their crafts under the big oak trees that still hold those 1920s survey markers. Rebecca Johnson opened her own practice specializing in homeowners association abuse cases. She's helped 14 other families facing similar property disputes, using our case as a template for peaceful resolution. The key, she always tells clients, is documentation, patience, and community support. The Conservation Initiative turned out to be my proudest achievement. 22 acres of pristine lakefront now sit under permanent conservation easement with the State Parks Department. School groups visit monthly to learn about wetland ecology and local history. The nature trails William helped design are wheelchair accessible, ensuring everyone can enjoy what my grandfather preserved. Robert Rodriguez started a neighborhood watch program focused on community building rather than surveillance. Sandra's coffee meetings became a weekly tradition where residents actually talked to each other instead of just complaining through official channels. The toxic culture Margaret created has been replaced by something resembling actual neighborliness. The media attention brought unexpected opportunities. I've spoken at 3 property law conferences about conflict resolution and worked with a documentary crew about homeowners association reform. The story became a case study at the State University's Public Administration program, teaching future city planners about the importance of proper land surveys. My personal life improved in ways I never expected. The confidence gained from standing up to institutional bullying attracted positive attention from people who valued integrity over convenience. I'm dating a wonderful woman named Jennifer, who heard the story and reached out to share her own experiences with community organizing. The camping trips continue, but they're richer now. Former enemies have become friends who join me for weekend retreats. We cook fish caught from Williams' restocked lake, tell stories under stars unmarred by light pollution, and sleep peacefully on land that's finally being used as it was meant to be, bringing people together rather than driving them apart. 3 practical takeaways saved my case and could save yours. First, survey your property boundaries every 10 to 15 years to prevent disputes before they start. Second, demand annual independent audits and transparent financial reporting from any homeowners association or community organization. Third, keep all property documents in both fireproof safes and digital backups. You never know when century-old paperwork might save your legacy. Frank Thompson still visits to share memories of fishing with my grandfather. Your grandpa always said the lake belonged to anyone willing to respect it, he told me last weekend. Looks like you found a way to honor that. The gentle sound of water lapping against the shore has returned to its peaceful rhythm, no longer interrupted by legal battles or community conflict. Children catch their first fish from the same dock where I learned 70 years of family tradition. The stone fire pit continues hosting stories that connect generations. Sometimes I sit here at sunset, watching families enjoy amenities that almost got torn down by one person's greed and pride. The $165,000 bought more than property rights. It bought community healing and a sustainable future for this special place. The lake reflects not just trees and sky now, but the faces of neighbors who chose cooperation over conflict, truth over convenience, and justice over expediency. If you've survived your own homeowners association nightmare, drop a comment and share your story. I read every single one, and your experiences help others facing similar battles. And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button because next week I'm telling you about the time my neighbor tried to claim my driveway and ended up owing me $55,000. Until then, keep fighting the good fight. Sometimes standing up for what's right takes everything you've got, but it's always worth protecting your legacy.